Okay, I'm starting the recording now. Testing audio. Audio set. Excellent. Just going to wait a minute before I begin. Begin sharing my screen. Okay, audio check is clear. Screen check is clear. All right, I'm going to get started now. This presentation is being recorded. It will be posted later on for Berkeley College use online and via a YouTube video. I am happy to take questions as we go along in the webinar. If anyone has any questions, feel free to use the chat feature. It's located as a button on the leftmost side of your webinar screen, and you're welcome to activate that and ask any questions. Thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon. My name is Lily Sakaro. I'm one of the reference and instruction librarians at Berkeley College at the New York City Midtown campus. I'm happy to talk to you today. So let's get to the chase here. PowerPoints, right? You all do them. It's a pretty ubiquitous presentation type. Sometimes you're doing them so much and the process goes so quickly, or it's really design heavy or content heavy, that we sort of forget that ultimately what we're trying to do is convey information to an audience, people who want to take something away with us. I ultimately hope that this webinar is going to help with some design considerations for your future presentations. It really applies anywhere, whether it's school, job talks, or your actual career where you're working with PowerPoints. You know, they have been in style for a long time. They're probably not going out of style anytime soon. Of course, you can apply this to other areas, but we're going to focus for a little bit first. So let's get started. This confused little puppy wonders what is going on with that PowerPoint. Do you ever just sit in a room with somebody presenting and you are like, how is that person not noticing that their text is super tiny on screen? Nobody can hear them in the back of the room. There's an absolutely horrible color scheme, you know, all sorts of things like that. It happens a lot, right? There are times when we sit down and we're watching someone else present and we say, I would never do that. But really, more often than we expect, we sort of fall into these common traps that can be really frustrating. So for example, putting something on screen like this, words that are conveying important content that may be visible to you from where you're sitting right in front of your computer or in front of the drop-down screen, but really orange on an orangey background, it can really fade out for people and they sort of have to squint, and that's annoying. Things like that start to happen. Here's another example. You know, it's large-ish text. That's pretty good. But as you get to sort of that first half on the screen, you see that it's fading into the background and it's not that easy to read. And you think, oh, well, obviously I wouldn't contrast it like that. But I kid you not. I have seen guest lecturers for classes of mine come up to the screen and they have a black background with dark brown text for the whole presentation, and nobody in the class feels like telling them. So what could they have done better is a good question. Some people just like to put text right over some images that they have. There's some text here in front of this dog, which some people might not even notice is there because of the image, and then it starts blending into the features, and that's what people do occasionally. Or someone will put tons and tons of text on a slide and read exactly what it says out loud, and by the time they get to the third slide, everyone is annoyed and tired and wants to go home, specifically to not think about whatever it is that you're presenting to them. And there's only so much that bullet points can save. Probably not this pretty gaudy red text. And then some people just type super tiny there at the bottom in a not great color. Anyway, you get the gist, right? So why? Why does this happen? And the best answer for it is that we can't always think like our audience all the time. We are not them. So what can we do about it? This is where we get into the concept of universal design. Universal design is basically a principle or set of principles that means you are creating content for the broadest possible audience and their information and learning needs. Basically, practicing universal design means that you're being automatically meticulous and thorough in your work, and most importantly, flexible. You're being flexible, and doing that is excellent because it means that you're taking time to consider others in your work. It's not always the easiest, simplest, or fastest route to do something, but it really does make a big difference, especially because a major issue with any kind of design is that the users are not you. Everyone learns differently, as we see up here. Everyone has different preferences and learning styles and ways that information gets to them better. And the problem with an audience, even if it's a small group of people, is that we can't really ask them that most of the time. We don't have that luxury. So the ways we learn best are what we default to, so how we would like to see something on a screen perhaps, but they don't always align with what others are going to take away from the most. So designing for everyone helps us avoid not only some of these basic mistakes, but it helps us make sure that everybody gets something from what we're presenting. Basically, universal design is a component of a larger field of user experience. I actually learned about universal design as a component of accessibility. So when I say accessibility, I mean making content equally usable by people with disabilities. So whether that's visual or hearing or cognitive, so learning disabilities, physical disabilities, I want to make sure that they can still access my content and understand it without problem. As an example, one that I like to share, you probably all know by now that no one really designs buildings anymore without ramps and elevators, for example, because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a legal standard in place. But ramps and elevators aren't only helpful to people with disabilities. They are helpful to people, maybe they're elderly or pregnant or don't feel like taking the stairs that day. They help people carrying heavy items, pushing carts, or wheeling something. You just never know what other kinds of uses are going to come into play there. And the same really should go for digital content. So you start with these accessibility principles that may be to help a specific audience, but ultimately serve a wider purpose. So there's really no one way to do this. There's no one best practice for dealing with universal design. I like to think of it more in terms of asking good questions about what you're making. So becoming sort of your own best resource for evaluating accessible design. And this can apply to presentations, projects, other course materials, posters, any online resources you're doing. So for example, the main overarching question is my content still usable and understandable if, under the category of cognition, what if one of my audience has dyslexia or difficulties reading standard print? What if they have trouble seeing words that are upside down or diagonal or sort of squished together? In the vision category, what if someone is blind or has low vision in my audience? Maybe a physical audience or a virtual one. What if they're colorblind, have color vision deficiency, and something that is mostly conveyed by color is not necessarily a point that we'll get across to them? What if they're not a visual learner and they really need to hear things as well? What if they're in really bright lights or low lights? What if they're sitting really close by or way in the back of a room? In the hearing and speech category, what if they're hearing impaired or completely or partially? You don't always know to ask that. If it's a loud setting or a quiet setting, maybe you're in a large room. Maybe you don't have an auditory learner who really just needs to read and focus on the words of the screen. And lastly, what if someone has difficulty with language? Say they are learning English as a second language or whatever the language of the presentation might be. That's someone to take into consideration. So all of these things are excellent questions to ask as a forethought. It's a lot harder to incorporate any sort of answers to these when you go back at the end of your project when you're done and tired of it, right? So you want to think of these beforehand. So today what we're going to do is go through this sort of list of things, basic things about presentations, common features, font choice, text size, color contrast, media, so adding images or video to your presentations, and then the style of presenting in person versus sharing stuff online. So ultimately, a couple of these things may seem totally obvious to you or straightforward, but really these are meant to be a collection of basic tips and tricks, little things that you can do on an individual scale that either inspire others who are watching your presentation, maybe are doing a presentation later. I mean, you just never know who you're making a really big difference for. So let's start with fonts and text. I don't know what people have been telling you lately, but size matters. Ha ha ha. So it really does. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and say, just really you shouldn't be using much smaller than 24-point font. Depends on the font, obviously. If you're using a naturally larger one, then that's fine. But the larger the audience, the bigger your text should be on screen. Again, you don't want anyone focusing on the fact that they can't see what you're talking about. You know, you want them to be getting information in a couple of different ways at the same time, if possible. So really go for that larger text. It also helps not crowd the screen with a lot of information if you're using larger font. Clear, simple fonts used consistently. What I mean by that is try and pick one, maybe two fonts that you use throughout the full presentation. You really don't want to load it with all these different, stylistics and things like that. Those scripts are really not helpful to most people. Sans serif fonts are best. So serifs are those little sort of flourishes on text. So with Times New Roman, that's the best example that most people use. It has these little extra edges on most of the lettering. These fonts here that I list, Arial, Calibri, which is being used here in this presentation for Dana, these do not have those serifs, so they are without serifs. And they are generally better for reading on a screen or in a large non-paper setting. So that's something I would say as well. One other thing I want to point out, this is a personal tip of mine that I like to do every so often, depending on what's going on. You may notice that down here, where I talk about advanced character spacing options, that the word spacing here actually has a little bit more space in it between each character than the other words around it. So I'm going to show you quickly how I did that. I'm going to X out of my presentation here. I'm now in PowerPoint mode. If I click on and highlight the word spacing, and then I go all the way up to the top here under font, and I click that little arrow, as a font option, there's a tab that says character spacing, which if I click, you may be able to see that it says that the spacing of this word, which happens to be the word spacing, is expanded by 1.2 points. Now for larger text, you probably don't need to expand it that much, but see what happens when I set that back to 0. If I put 0 there instead, now are you watching down here the word spacing? It got squished. I don't know if you could see that. And I'll undo that, and now it's wider again. So sometimes it makes a big difference just having that bitty extra little space in there. So one other thing I would like to point out is this great site. It's called webaim.org. It stands for Web Accessibility in Mind. I'm not going to go to the site right now, but I do encourage you to explore it on your own because there are some excellent features in WebAIM. It's one of my major go-to resources. They give examples of the different fonts, etc. So let's move on. Color contrast. This gets really tricky because many people see different colors different ways. I've had arguments with people about, what color is this? No, you're wrong. And that's frustrating too. There are actually color standards for web content under what's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And I think these standards are also great for presentations as well. I'll show you what those look like just in a second, but overall you should remember, keep backgrounds simple. You'll see that where there is text on my screen, pretty much throughout this presentation, the background is more or less a plain color. Pretty much one color, sometimes a little bit more than that. You really want high contrast text, so black on something lighter, white on something darker. If you need to bold the text to make it stand out a little more, that's okay too. I think overall, more people prefer dark text on a light background, so what's at the top of my screen here, as opposed to, white text on all black. It's actually supposed to be easier to read, but as long as your contrast is strong, you're in a good place. So let me actually show you. This is another WebAIM resource, the Color Contrast Checker. See if I can open this in my browser. Yep. So hopefully you're all seeing that here. I'm on the WebAIM website. And it gives you this foreground and background contrast here. You can see the sample text under normal. And I can just click this text box, choose a color. This is my foreground. I'll make it a blue. It's sort of a light blue. And then I can choose the background. Make it an orange, and I don't know if you can see how absolutely terrible that looks, the blue on the orange, but you can fiddle around with that and really see what it looks like to other people and whether it passes the test. So this one failed the test, you can see, but if you do something like, oops, I want a white, yeah, so that was a white background, and then I can do like dark test. See, that passes the test. Right, so you can fiddle around with this. It's kind of a fun tool. And there's some that actually show you what it looks like if you do have a color blindness issue or something like that. So next I'm going to move on to adding media. This sort of deals with the multiple formats thing. You really want to have mixed media as much as you can because people sometimes are visual learners, they are textual learners, they want to read content, or they're auditory learners. And some people don't even know themselves what they might be, which can be a problem. So you always sort of want to make sure that you're covering a lot of different bases. And actually, I'm pretty sure I read something that said listening and viewing at the same time helps you get more information out of something, but that may not apply to everyone. So a couple of things that I want to explain is alternate text. I'll start with that. Alternate text basically is another way of ensuring that no information is lost the way that you're trying to convey it. So it's originally meant for people who are using screen readers, so this is usually blind users, and they are using software that reads the screen to them. And this is a way of conveying images without them seeing the actual images, conveying image through text. But it also helps to support someone maybe whose browser is not working well or supporting images, and it would just say the text instead of showing the image for some reason. And one thing that most people don't know is that adding alternate text to images actually helps them come up more frequently or higher in search engines because it's another sort of keyword that's identifying what you're looking at. So that's basically something you want to do as much as humanly possible, doing that alternate text adding. I will show you what that looks like later. So captioned videos. If you have a video, for Pete's sake, if you can get a captioned one, it's better. Check in YouTube, see if you can click that closed caption button that you'll see sometimes. And I'm not talking the automatic terrible YouTube captions that come up. You really want to make sure that it's been input by somebody who made the video. I consider videos not to be complete until there are captions there. It's a very important feature, not just for people who have hearing difficulties, but this is for people who just want to read something at the same time. Maybe they are in a loud room and they can't fully hear what is being said, and they want to read it too. So captions should be, first of all, there and available, but also really pretty well synchronized with the audio and should be portraying the equivalent information there. And again, you just want to be careful with your alternate formats, providing transcripts, things like that. You never know when a PowerPoint's not going to load on somebody's computer, but maybe a PDF or a Word document will. It's a good consideration to have. So my last two major points here. I'm going to talk about the difference with the different environments where you can present. So you have an environment where you are presenting in person to an audience, and there are people in front of you, or there's one where you upload something to email or Blackboard or whatever your platform is, and people never really hear you give the presentation. You just have it there in front. So I'm going to start with the actual in-person presentation because there are different considerations in the different environments. Most importantly, you don't want to overload the screen. Concepts in the slides should be easily related to the information on screen. So what you're saying doesn't have to be exactly that. You want to convey major concepts with one slide in, a multi-formatted way. Again, we're thinking of those best practice questions, right? So especially, you don't have to read every bullet point, but if you're describing something that really helps convey the content, then that should be described aloud. I'm not describing my background images here. I don't have to tell you that you're looking at chairs, but if I were showing a graph or a chart with really specific data on it, I would want everyone to know what that's talking about. I would want to make sure that people in the back, or if the image is blurry, can all know what that is talking about. You want to try and summarize somewhere so people can keep track of where you are in the presentation, and how much might be left, where you've been, where you're going, that kind of thing. It really helps, even at the end, if you just want to do a wrap-up. Another major one is if people are in the audience asking questions afterwards. Boy, have you ever been in a situation where people will raise their hands in the front of a room, ask a question, but you're sitting way in the back and you have no idea what that person said, and the speaker just starts answering the question without telling you what it was. And that's really frustrating to people. So repeat the questions out loud. If people don't seem to be replying to when you ask them questions, try and rephrase the questions. And lastly, limit your animations. I know that's a major feature in PowerPoint and some of its appeal, but you don't want people to feel like they're on a roller coaster. You can have some fade-ins, some appearances suddenly, depending on where your content is and where you want it to be, but just don't overload it with that. It can be very distracting to some people. Now, by contrast, if you are sharing something online, if you're presenting and then sharing it later, maybe somebody missed your presentation, even if you gave it to most of the class, that kind of thing. If you would normally be describing your content aloud, then you want to make sure that there is a transcript available, or the information on the screen is basically what you were saying without totally overdoing it. So as I said, I've been talking about these alternate formats. Videos should be captioned and described because you can't supplement that by being there. You're not going to be physically there in this case. Descriptive links and images. Now that's tricky. If you have links in your presentation, I can't stress enough how irritating the links that just say click here are. Links should convey where they're going to take you. If they're going to take you to a website or a video or whatever it is, you can hyperlink things and name them. I could take the word descriptive here and link it to something, and then the link would be there and working. But you want to make sure it's not just click on this or here's something to see. You want them to know where they're going. Same with images. I was talking about alternate text before. Alt text is really, really critical. Descriptions for all images. I'm going to X out of my presentation mode. Whoops. Here I am in PowerPoint. I'm going to go to my share slide. And I'm going to show you how you would do alternate text for an image. For example, so this background image of mine, the share one, I can right-click. I've right-clicked on this image. I go to Format Picture at the bottom here, and I get a tab or a panel come up here. I'm going to click on Size and Properties. It's this little third box here at the top. and you'll always have an option for alt text. Now, people are very tempted to put something in the title, like, oh, I'm naming the image this, but that's not actually the alt text function. You want to put a description, a full description, in the description headed box. So never put that information in the title. You'll see that my description for this image is keyboard with share button. Now, that more or less explains the image. If someone needed to know, they know. It's not super important, but it's up there. If the text, if there's image on the text, or the image has a lot of words that are important on it, then you may want to be more descriptive. But in general, be descriptive but concise, because people using screen readers will have these whole things read back to them if they choose. So that's the alt text. Another top tip that I can tell you is to do an accessibility check that PowerPoint has. It's under File Info, so I'm going to go up there here to the corner, the orange File tab. Now I've moved on. It's actually what comes up automatically, that first Info tab. And you'll see there's something that says Check for Issues here. I'm going to click that. And then there's the middle one that says Check Accessibility. You can actually run a check on how accessible your presentation is. I'm going to do that now. It pops up another pane on the side here. So here it would tell you if you have an image that does not have alternate text or alt text on it, it would tell you which slides those were, and you could go to the format picture and make that change yourself. In this case, what it's telling me is it doesn't give me any warnings. Warnings are what you have to look out for, but tips are sort of extra help. So if you see that all of my slides have tips on them, and I'm on slide 10 right now, so it goes to the slide, and it's saying I should check reading order. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a different panel. You go up here on the Home tab, so we're home now, and we can go to Arrange, and then the selection pane. It's going to give a third pane on the side, and you'll see now that I have three things. I have image share button, because I have labeled, this is not my alt text, but I have also labeled this image. Then my slide is titled sharing content, but you can't actually see the title because I have turned it off. This little I is closed. And then it says the main text. And what this shows is how the slide should be read. So actually the thing at the bottom is going to be the first thing read aloud if someone is asking to have this read aloud to them. And then it goes up from there. So to take another slide, let's go back a ways. If I'm on slide 7, you'll see that image goes first, the background image, color contrast, main text, and then I have another text at the top. And these are all labeled by me. And the reading order is correct, so it goes from bottom to top. And you can sort of drag and drop these if you want. You sort of see how that works. But that's a tip from the accessibility checker that you can do, and it really, once you're used to doing this, it really doesn't take very long, and it's very helpful. Again, you just never know who it's going to affect in a positive way. So I'm going to close all of these panes, go back to my slide. So those were things you can do, the accessibility checker, the alt text, the reading order. These are a little bit more advanced, but there's no reason you can't do these on all your presentations. It really just takes 2 extra minutes, 1 extra minute per image and per slide. So I have now some links up for you here. I'm not going to go to any of these at the moment, but we have, these are sort of my go-to resources from several different universities and schools that have departments sort of specializing in this kind of thing. These are all PowerPoint specific tips. If you want to take some time to write down these short links here, the bit.ly links, these will take you to that site. I will also probably link those as well in a transcript or another format, or probably on YouTube when this presentation is published. but you're more than welcome to check this out on your own. If you're feeling really ambitious, this thing at the bottom here in a separate box, the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, is also from WebAIM, the site that I was showing you earlier. But this one, you can plug in any URL or web address from a website, and it will show you visually where some of the accessibility problems are. Do something like Facebook. It's hilarious to see how many mistakes there are in the web design. And, some people work to correct that, and some people have a lot less luck with it. So that is totally something you can delve more into. Again, a lot of those tips are pretty specific to PowerPoint, or at least can be applied to any presented content that you have. So go ahead, follow the white rabbit or the links, whatever you would like. I'm going to put my email address up here. It's Lillian-Saccharo. My name is not that easy to spell. You can call me Lily, but either way it's fine, at berkeleycollege.edu. You're more than welcome to email me anytime with questions or comments about any of the content that you have seen today, or follow up. I'd be happy to meet with anyone or discuss this topic further. I could probably talk about this all day, but I'm not gonna. So I hope some of these links might be of interest to some of you. I'll finish with my image credits slide because I am a librarian and you must cite everything. Again, my images used for this were all Creative Commons freely licensed pictures that you can use in your projects if you go to this site and search around. So, with my info back up on the screen. Thank you so much for watching this webinar. I do not have any questions at this time, but you may respond in YouTube comments or by emailing me directly. Thank you so much for participating. I will stop the recording in just a second.